Hey everyone, so welcome to this week's episode of Rolo's Questions. Today I'm going to be talking about a pretty complicated and complex topic, but I'll try and keep it simple as I'm still learning and I have just as many questions as you do. So I'm going to be talking about the law today. And more importantly, what is the law? Who has power to make law, and does the law actually apply to us? And so there's many different forms of law. And so it's pretty hard just to know which law we're using, which law applies to you, and which law you have to follow. So my goal with making this video is just to point people in the right direction for anyone that wants to know more about the law and how and if it applies to you. So just to start off, what is the law anyways? What's the difference between legal and lawful? Is there a difference? What's the definition of a person? Everyone goes around saying they're a person, I'm a person, and I have rights. People have rights. Do people actually have rights? The definition of a person, it says that people are capable of having rights. But being capable and actually having rights are two totally different things. And so let's look at the Charter of Rights. The Charter of Rights is what's supposed to give us all of these rights, but what does a charter even mean? In the law dictionary, charter means an instrument that establishes a body of politic or other organization, or that grants rights, liberties, and powers to its citizens and members. So that sounds pretty legit. It grants you these powers and rights and stuff. But what does grants mean? So grants means to permit or agree to. So they're permitting you to have these rights. But with that, any permission can be taken away. So at any point in time, they can be like, oh no, you don't have those rights anymore. And it happens all the time. It's just there's plenty of political prisoners in Canada, and there's lots of people that have been persecuted in this country who have been denied those rights. Just simple rights. So don't think that it doesn't happen, because it does. Okay, and so another question is, why do we always have to submit applications for anything we want to do? I mean, if you want to build something on your property, you got to submit an application. If you want to be able to drive, you got to submit an application. Anything you want to do, if you want to travel, you got to submit an application to get a passport. So what does submit mean? And it's pretty much the same as when you watch wrestling or the UFC or anything like that. When you submit, you tap out, you're submitting to their power over you. So now all of a sudden, you want to travel, you submit to get a passport. You can only travel to anywhere that passport allows you. You got to follow their rules and everything. You submit an application to get a driver's license. Now you have to register your vehicle, get insurance. Anytime you're stopped by the cops, you got to show your papers. You got to have a license plate and all of this stuff. So there's all of a sudden there's all these rules you have to follow just because you have given them power over what you do. I mean, driving is a perfect example. So anyone in common law, anyone is free to travel in their country of birth without the fear of molestation from government or peace officers. So what does traveling mean? What does driving mean? What are the differences? These are pretty important things to know and to look up. Okay, so, and did anyone actually read the Traffic Act before applying for a driver's license? The law is supposed to be so simple that anyone can understand it, but who reads it? There's hundreds of thousands of laws made every single year. How are we supposed to keep up with all of this? I mean, I'll just show you an example. This is the Criminal Code of Canada. Look how big it is. Who's actually going to go through that and read it? And that's just the criminal code. That doesn't include all the other stuff, all the other laws and stuff that they make that aren't criminal. So who has the time to read that? Who is going to be able to understand all of that? So how can we be governed by something we don't understand? The law should be simple for any person to understand. And so I'd say probably the most important question is, what gives these people that are making up all these laws and stuff every year the power to enforce them on us? And the answer to me is pretty simple, and it's only one word: consent. So like, what is consent? How are we giving them consent? Every time we use your ID and say that we're that person, we're giving them consent. Every time we submit an application to do something, we're giving them consent. Every time we vote, every time we pay taxes, every time we use our social insurance number, or stuff like this, stuff that we do every day and don't even think about the ramifications or consequences or the meaning of what we're doing, we're giving them consent. So Canada is a common law jurisdiction, and there's only one kind of government that's not authorized, but recognized as lawful in Canada, and that's a representative one. So representation requires mutual consent. In the absence of mutual consent, neither representation nor governance can exist. So what does that mean, really? So it means that all acts and statutes, so something like the Traffic Act, they're restricted in scope and applicability by the Constitution Act. And this is very important when you actually read the Constitution. And probably the most important part of the Constitution, I know, like this is the part that a lot of people refer to when they start saying, oh, the law doesn't apply to me, blah, blah, blah. So it's Section 32 of the Constitution Act. I'm not going to read it. You can look it up. It's on Canada website, the Government of Canada website, or if you want to go out and get a copy of the Constitution. But pretty much, it just says that from the Heritage Canada website, it says that the purpose of this section, Section 32, is to make it clear that the Charter only applies to governments and not to private individuals, businesses, or other organizations. So that's pretty huge, because so pretty much what it's saying is that the Constitution is limited to its members and employees of government. And this is why so many people refer to it, because they're like, oh, well, we're not employees of the government. The Constitution and all of its acts and statutes don't apply to us. But really, think about that. We are all employees of the government, because, do you have a social insurance number? Anyone with a SIN number is an employee of the government. That's your employee identification number. Anyone that pays into the Canada Pension Plan is an employee of Canada. Because who pays into pension plans? Employees do. It's just common sense. And make no mistake about it, Canada is a corporation. If you don't believe me, look it up on the U.S. Securities and Exchange website. It's listed there, the Corporation of Canada. But there is some good news to all of this. We are able to lawfully abandon our social insurance numbers. We don't need to be associated to that number anymore. We have the right to revoke or deny consent at any time that we choose. And anyone that does revoke or deny this consent is free to exist free of government control and statutory restraint. So that's pretty huge. So that's kind of getting out of the system and just revoking consent, no longer giving them consent to tell you how to live your life. Okay, so let's take a look at the Bill of Rights. So just the first paragraph in the Bill of Rights, I'm going to read this because this is very important. It's very short, so just bear with me. So it says, the Parliament of Canada, affirming that the Canadian nation is founded upon principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God, the dignity and worth of the human person, and the position of the family in a society of free men and free institutions. So that's huge. What part stood out to you? To me is that, the Parliament of Canada acknowledges the supremacy of God. I mean, that's huge. So it means God is at the top. No one is above God. No one can be above God, and they acknowledge this. So why is that so huge, and why does that even matter? Well, it's huge because we're children of God. We were made in the image of God, and so the only one that has any power over us is God. So that's very huge. So if there's any human being out there, whether they be a police officer, the prime minister, the secretary of defense, or whoever it is, the premier of Alberta, or anybody, any human being that wishes to claim authority over anyone, they must be able to prove a few things first to say that they stand between me and God, because they just said they acknowledge the supremacy of God. So any of these human beings must be able to prove that they're either somehow above God, or that they are God, or that they have a document upon which they can find the signature of God. And no one can ever be able to prove that. So that just shows in the hierarchy of law, there's God, and then there's us, because we are children of God. There's no one between us and God. So with that being said, no one can have authority over us. The only one who can claim authority over us is God. So with that, I'm going to end it at there, because that's huge. That just shows no government has power over us, and we need to wake up and stop giving them consent to rule our lives, pretty much. So that was just a brief introduction to a lot of questions that need to be asked. And when you are looking up the definitions of a lot of these words that I said, and for a lot of other things, don't use like a Webster's dictionary or something like that. Go out and get a law dictionary, because that's what they're using. They're using the definitions in here. And I would recommend actually getting a hard copy, because I've been on a few websites, that are law dictionary websites, and I personally don't like them. I would rather have the hard copy. It's so much easier and more useful to use, and so yeah, get the hard copy. So I would like to just receive some feedback from anyone that has any questions, or would like to talk about anything that I talked about, or anything else that relates to this subject, and pass this message along to anyone that you think might benefit from it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.